Our second reader has lived in Chicago since Eugene Sawyer was a mayor, which is a long time, but she is not from here. Since then, she has done equal time in publishing, museums, and alt weeklies, the trifecta of underpaid lady jobs. She cares deeply, terribly deeply, about buildings and letter shapes. There is more info in the general way online, including cookie creations, if you look for her name. Please give a warm welcome to Elizabeth Tamny.
Okay. I want to know if people can hear me. Can you hear me in the back there?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I worried I would kill Doris Day by writing this. I worry superstitiously, as I do every year, that the focus on her birthday, she turns 97 tomorrow, will kill her. The fact that she is now officially her real age, which is 2 years older than the studio-era version of her age, just makes me worry more. If I or the world had finished her off with our attention the last few days, I would now be tearing up these pages and leading us all in a group sing of Que Sera Sera, a song I don't even like. Voices dropping out one by one as the repetitiveness of the tune became clear, me sobbing and all of you embarrassed. Just talking about this feels like I'm tempting fate. I have thought about Doris Day every day of my adult life, and most days imagined and worried what the world would look like without her in it, and that is what I'm here to talk about. To wrestle with why she has such a hold on me, and to try to convey at least some of the appreciation she deserves. My Doris worship has some predictable extremes. Many times on her birthday I have, like the character in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, who stays home from school on Richie Blackmore's birthday to listen to Deep Purple all day, stayed in on April 3rd to watch wall-to-wall Doris movie marathons. Excuse me. One time I was watching Deadwood with friends, in which Calamity Jane is a character, of course, and insisted we all stop to watch the opening sequence of the 1953 musical Calamity Jane, with blonde Doris singing and dancing as the title character, and it did not go well. When I went to see A.E. Hotchner, the co-author of Doris's best-selling 1975 autobiography, at the premiere of a film about his childhood, I approached him afterward and yelled nicely, "I love your book with Doris Day." To his everlasting credit, Mr. Hotchner gave it a beat and said, "She's a great lady," and left it at that. I've also tried unsuccessfully to write about her many times. I know way too much about her, which is part of the problem. 30 years of obsession isn't enough time to figure it out. Pervy old John Updike was a huge Doris Day fan too, who spoke and wrote about her well, despite also once publishing an astonishingly embarrassing poem about her. I'm not going to quote it. And he shared this struggle, once writing, "I'm always looking for insights into the real Doris Day because I'm stuck with this infatuation and need to explain it to myself." Doris is a koan, a paradox, a mystery, an amazing artist living on in great art and terrible art, a container of contradictions. People find her uniquely irrelevant or love everything she did. I don't know how much you know about her, but she was and remains incredibly popular. She was a big band singer, movie star, recording artist, and TV star. She still holds the record as the #1 female box office star of all time. She's apparently turned down the Kennedy Center honors several times because of her distaste for travel, ditto an honorary Oscar. She's also extremely talented. James Cagney said that she was one of 3 actresses who he knew had it the first time he saw them. Jazz singer Sarah Vaughan famously named her one of her favorite singers. Her quote is, "I dig Doris Day." And opera star Anna Moffo said Doris was her favorite singer of all time. Doris recorded the Oscar-winning song Secret Love, which she introduced to Calamity Jane, in one 15-minute take after riding her bike to the studio. I also just like her. You either believe certain movie stars when they speak or you don't. You like their smile or you don't. Her movie star alchemy works for me. I resent it when she doesn't get more screen time. I hate Ray Bolger for eating up all that time by himself in April in Paris. I love her singing voice, even when it's a little smarmy, and I love her speaking voice, which is also a little smarmy, but mostly responsive and musical with endless categories of expression. Doris learned, legendarily from her voice teacher in Cincinnati, to sell a song by imagining singing it to just one person. For every rabid fan, Doris has a hater who considers her a joke. By the end of her career, her last film was in 1968, her TV show ended in 1973, she was slogging through some terrible films, the first bursts of which were terribly popular and knitted together. This is the dominant day critique. They offered the unconvincing persona of a woman pushing 40, indignantly defending her virginity, even, as people said, the filters on the camera grow thicker and thicker. It's a lot more complicated than that, but we don't have that much time. These late career missteps produced the scorn that many still attach to her name. Scorn for which we must, as in all things, blame the baby boomers. They grew up with her, then they found her insufferable as the world changed and she didn't. Cranky film critic John Simon called her film sickening and her affect absolutely sanitary, her personality untouched by human emotions, her brow unclouded by human thought. The word antiseptic comes up a lot in her later reviews. In the popular 1995 book, Where the Girls Are, an analysis of the effects of mass media on women, Susan Douglas mentions Doris a few times only in passing, saying her voice seemed as innocent of sexual or emotional angst as a chatty Cathy doll. As Updike wrote, the words Doris Day get a reaction, often adverse. The most famous critical quote about Doris, which crystallizes the contempt heaped on her superannuated virgin persona, is from Oscar Levant, who starred with her in the early Warner Brothers musicals before both her best period of movie making in the 1950s and before the 1960s sex comedies. Levant's words, "I knew her before she was a virgin," will be in her obituary. Thank God for film critic Molly Haskell. It was Haskell who began to challenge in her writing the wholesale dismissal of Doris Day as an empty, chirpy, blindly sunny, and sexless star, eventually calling her the most underrated, underappreciated actress that has ever come out of Hollywood, and even interviewing her for Ms. Magazine in the 1970s. Haskell wrote, appreciating the proto-feminist boldness of some of her working girl characters, I became suspicious of the quickness with which most people dismissed her. Why the refusal to take her seriously? What was so threatening about her? Was it that her all-American wholesomeness in the anti-American 60s, this little editorializing in by Molly Haskell, had become an embarrassment? Her cheery optimism and determination were not only qualities we had lost, but ones we felt ashamed of having entertained in the first place. Or was it that she was too close for many of us to something we had been or wanted to be in the 50s and were now running from for our lives? I think the first film of Doris's that I watched was That Touch of Mink, a 1962 film with Cary Grant that thoughtful Doris defenders and even die-hard fans have problems with, because it's the one film where the plot is overtly concerned with virginity. I was young enough not to engage with that so much as with the pull of this close, almost claustrophobic, artificial designed film where women's coats matched their dresses and your lunch was obtained through tiny, adorable chrome windows at an automat. In the middle of that, Doris seemed like a vital spark, a blinding life force. She did not seem blandly perky, she seemed real, immediate. Who was this person? I think I'm also obsessed with her because some of her films are so bad. And honestly, sometimes she makes them worse by being good in them. A great actor in the middle of terrible decision-making. That alone is a recipe for keeping you obsessed with the star in their films forever. Gloria Steinem wrote about our culture's rescue fantasies with Marilyn Monroe, which I get and share, but I also want to rescue Doris, perky, self-sufficient, bootstraps Doris. Doris's third husband, Marty Melcher, also her manager, was responsible for much of the terrible career decision-making, especially after her studio contract expired. He shaped her vehicles, criminally mismanaged her money, forbade her from singing ballads, insisting she stick to upbeat songs and novelty tunes. and referred to her in meetings as Doris Day, all one word, like a kind of dishwasher soap. In a 1968 interview, Melcher said about her planned TV show, revealing what I think is the actual problem with her persona, "Don't forget she is always the victim. She has an inner morality which prevents her from doing anything wrong knowingly." One of the interesting questions about being a Doris apologist creates, you can learn things from being an apologist, is the idea of who pays for the wrongs in old films. Victimhood, outdated or offensive ideals, racism, jingoism, unconvincing plot twists. Who's the ultimate author of them? Individual literacy with old films aside, who do we blame for what's dated badly? Doris, with her absolute lack of guile, is often held overly responsible for the sins of her era. People are really sure she's not in on the joke. The fact that Doris hit her dingers and hung them up, she has devoted herself to animal welfare since the 1970s, both exacerbates this and at this point relieves her a little of the burden. It also means that we are left with less context to understand her as someone who has not instigated reputational rebirth by staying in the public eye. Perhaps this is why I worry about her dying. Aside from grief and aside from her status as one of the oldest living movie stars, what will change? I don't plan on stalking her anymore in her home in Carmel. That was a plan at one point. I don't know her. Perhaps her continued presence reassures me her ambiguousness can stand. When she goes, the deluge of professional and amateur eulogizing will inundate us with phrases like girl next door, perennial virgin, post-war optimism. None of them will be quite right, but neither will be the language of the wholesale defenders. And at that point, she'll start to disappear for good. It's late and there's no one here to fight me about it, so I'm just going to say I think Doris Day is an auteur. People know exactly what they mean when they say, oh, that's a Doris Day film, even though her films were very different over the course of her career. Several of the actors interviewed for her autobiography, like James Garner and Jack Lemmon, said she was someone you had to act up to. She shaped her films. Her one film with Hitchcock, the classically definitive auteur, the man who knew too much, suffers from the fact that he couldn't prune her intense presence into a cool Hitchcock blonde. I love lots of movie stars, including the ones who embodied everything Doris wasn't. I like actors who wink ironically at us from the screen. But I also love Doris Day, giant talent hiding in plain sight.